Hello and welcome to the program Economic Forum. My name is Tawanda Gudlanga. This week we are focusing on business leadership, just trying to understand what it is like in Zimbabwe. And my guest this week is Dr. Eve Christine GADZIKWA. She is the Director General, Standards Association of Zimbabwe. She also is the current president of the African Organization on Standardization, ASO, and the first female president for that matter. She also runs a concept that is known as Dare to Lead. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Tawanda.
So many accolades, but let's quickly rush to the issue of Dare to Lead. Tell us more about it.
Yes, Tawanda, Dare to Lead is a concept which I actually mooted in 2015, having realized that as leaders, we've got an important strategic role to play in our economy. I'd also noted that as leaders, we need to focus on the outcomes. We are not actually paid to go to work, but we are actually paid to produce results. And what I noted was that a number of leaders, especially women, I speak as a woman, most women are afraid to lead. Sometimes they even shun away from taking leadership roles. So I was daring people to lead and saying, look, there's an opportunity for you to do something and to make an impact in your country.
Let's talk about corporate Zimbabwe. What is your assessment in terms of leadership quality?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I believe we're still a long way to go in terms of leadership. I think there's a number of things that we need to realize, that when you're in leadership, people are looking up to you. You need to provide, to be a role model, in fact, and to provide some sort of means that other people can learn from. In other words, all of us have learned from other people in the past. There's no need for you to reinvent the wheel, but there are certain key principles that we need to be guided by.
What are those principles?
When we talk about the Dare to Lead concept, we are essentially saying that as a leader, what are the things that you should be aware of? I'll give you as an example, the issue of being ethical. The standard of business in Zimbabwe should be guided by ethical principles. And I'm sure you are aware that the National Code on Corporate Governance was actually mooted against this background because we realized that our moral fiber in our society had gone down. That's one of the issues. The issue also of accountability. Our leaders need to be more accountable. It's okay to be given a senior role, to lead in an organization or in any sort of capacity, but you must be accountable for everything that you do.
It's interesting you talk about leaders being paid to produce results, but is it not the other way where leaders are actually paid to do the work?
That's an interesting one. Of course, sometimes we feel that because I'm in a certain position, I need to be paid. But I think at the end of the day, if you're a responsible leader, you need to really lead by example and produce the results.
But the issue is around probably Zimbabwe evolving, because one of the issues that I've heard some critics say is that leaders are coming out of, most of the leaders are actually coming out of poverty, as it were. So there was not enough generation of wealth that had a positive impact on them. And it is now on them that they are now creating wealth for the future generations, and as such, they're not really worried about ethics, they're not worried about results. For now, it's about wealth generation. What would be your view?
Correct. I mean, wealth generation is okay, but at the end of the day, we want a win-win-win. And what are we saying there? The company must win and make profits. It is important for any organization to be sustainable and to be viable. But if you have to be sustainable into the future, you also need to look at the other two P's, which is people, the people that you're working with in your organization. Are you being fair to them? And lastly, the planet or the community. If you're a leader and you're just working in a leadership position without thinking about the community around you, you're not really a leader.
There's always been that assertion that leaders in the private sector tend to perform better than those that are in the public sector, talking about state enterprises, parastatals. What would be your comment on that?
I wouldn't want to say that. I think it's an unfair assessment. Yes, we have our challenges in our state-owned enterprises and the parastatals, but But equally so, I can say the same of some of our private institutions. Because, if you look at some organizations, they don't even have a corporate culture. You might go to a reception and you want to be served and you find that somebody is busy playing with their phone. They don't even have the concept of, serving the customer. And at the end of the day, keeping the customer as king. So yes, we've got a long way to go with our state-owned enterprises, but private sector also has a role to play.
Let's talk about the private sector itself, which the belief is that they are supposed to be the flag bearers of economic transformation. What does the characteristic of the business leader today in the private sector look like? Because business is not as flourishing as it was 10, 15 years ago.
When I've been assessing our business leaders out there, the leader who is leading organizations today is very different from that person that was leading maybe 10, 15 years ago. You're expected to be savvy in terms of technology, IT. You're also expected to know standards. For instance, I've been talking to a number of chief executive officers or people in the C-suite, and what I've seen is that a number of them are aware of some of the things to do with standards, with risk, with accountability, with reporting. There's a lot that the new CEO is expected to do. And that's why it's now important for people to dare to lead and to realize that there's more to it than just the ordinary type of leadership. You really need to be on top of the game.
And are they finding these attributes from the MBAs, the PhDs, and of course the master's degree programs that they're going through? Because there is an assumption that there should be a link between competence and qualification.
You're raising an important point. Competence is important, skills are important, but also emotional intelligence is also important. The chief executive officer or anyone who is in the C-suite, a business leader, needs to have emotional intelligence. You must be able to join the dots, to complete the picture, to have a more strategic view of the future. And, you must be aware of the community around you. You just don't have to be somebody with a straight jacket. You're supposed to be more broad, more wide, and to have a lot of depth, to be able to make decisions, sometimes even at the spur of the moment with very little information, to be able to connect the dots, as it were.
And talking about this, we've had a significant number of women who have empowered themselves over the year. But you did speak about the fact that some have actually shunned having to take up a leadership roles. What has been the most intimidating factor?
Well, I guess the most intimidating factor, especially for women, is that we still find that there are very few women who are on decision-making roles. Chief executives, for instance, who still have most of them being men. And it's not because the women don't want to. Let me clarify that. The issue really is, as a woman is going through her career, she also is getting older, she's having children, she's getting married, more responsibilities. So she has to make these choices. She's constantly having to juggle these choices to say, okay, should I stay late at a board meeting or should I be at home helping my children, with their homework? Those are the challenges, the reality, as it were. But I also want to say, if you are a leader, you have to overcome those challenges and go for it.
We'll talk more about the challenges in the second segment as we talk about business leadership in Zimbabwe. Join us then. Welcome back. This is Economic Forum, where we are focusing on business leadership in Zimbabwe. And with me is business leader, Dr. Eve Christine GADZIKWA. Now, before we went to the break, you're talking about the challenges that women leaders are actually facing. But let's talk about the international and the regional expectation, because culture becomes a very, very key aspect of how one then becomes a successful leader. How are other women across the region and globe doing it?
Well, maybe let me start with at a regional level, because I've had the privilege of interacting with women at that level. I want to say they face the same challenges as we do. I think by and large when we meet, we do discuss. And similar to Zimbabwe, we're saying that we are open for business. And I think, with the African continental free trade area, everyone is looking at this open market. The challenges really that the business leaders are facing out there are the same. The ability to relate across cultures, the ability to speak the same language, and even the ability to communicate openly and effectively. Because as I said, leadership is about using your strategic tools to be able to make decisions. And it takes a lot for a business leader today to operate at a regional level. Similarly, at an international level, there's even more challenge at that level. Because you are expected to be able to relate with people from different cultures, and also to understand what the requirements are in that market. Zimbabwe is trading with many countries, not only in Africa, but even with the whole world, meaning that you must be able to understand what is required in that market and what are the requirements in terms of, could it be standards, could it be business culture? What are the expectations? What gives them confidence? What are the investors looking for when they're looking at Zimbabwe as an investment destination?
Which becomes a very interesting talking point, and the fact that Zimbabwe is said to be open for business. And the question is the traction, because we've had political players, for example, say probably it's taking too much time. We haven't seen traction from the mantra Zimbabwe is open for business. Let's really look at the business itself, or the way of doing business in Zimbabwe. Is it good enough to really attract investment?
Well, I think my assessment is that I think the first point is that we've had a realization that we cannot continue to be closed. We have been isolated for a long time. I think the thing is, going forward, the preparedness is very important for business leaders.
But did you have to take Emerson Mnangagwa for him to say Zimbabwe is open for business? Yet we are saying we've got this crop of business leaders in Zimbabwe.
Look, we've already been trading with the rest of the world. It's not like we were not already doing business across the board in the region and internationally. But I think the mantra of Zimbabwe is open for business needs to be qualified. And I always joke about this by saying that Zimbabwe is not open for business only, but it's also open for quality business. And Zimbabwe is open for clean business. And I say that because out there, when people are looking at Zimbabwe, they've got other choices. They can go to Botswana, they can go to Zambia, they can go to Nigeria. And the question is, why would they come to Zimbabwe? So it's that preparedness to say, are we ready? What is it that we need to do to make ourselves ready? And are we articulating what we want in terms of our requirements?
So then if we were to look at performance in industry, in commerce, what does it speak about the business leader today?
Well, it says as a business leader, we need to be ready. And one of the things that we need to do is to look at our corporate culture. We need to look at our issues to do with compliance, issues to do with standards, with ethics, with corporate governance. It's a lot of things. For us to tick all those boxes, even the ease of doing business. We've heard about the one-stop shop. These are the issues that we need to look at and really make them a reality. Not to just make it a mantra, but make it a reality. To say, if we say we are open for business, what are we saying? It should not just end on paper, but in reality.
Dr. GADZIKWA, you were instrumental in the creation or the formulation of the National Code on Corporate Governance. And this was met with serious backlash coming from the business leaders themselves. Given that, what does it speak to when we are saying that we are open for business?
Well, in terms of corporate governance and the code, which was actually launched in 2015, I'm happy to say that we've moved, leaps and bounds. I think you are aware that the state-owned enterprises and parastatals have actually taken up those principles and actually made it into law. So government has actually made these principles into law.
Which is very interesting because it's coming more from the public sector setting, as it were, and very silent when you look at the private sector itself.
Correct. When the code was actually talking about apply or explain, meaning that you have a choice to apply or explain. I think the important thing here, Tawanda, is to realize the benefits. When you are implementing principles of good governance, one needs to realize why am I doing this? What benefits am I going to accrue from doing this? And this is where we are. I think all of us have realized now that we cannot continue doing what we used to do in the past. If we want to attract FDI, we have to implement the principles of good governance, because this is what is expected of us as a nation. And therefore, I think we're going the right direction. Yes, you're talking about public sector, but even the private sector, I must say the uptake of the code has been very, very good. And a number of companies have already bought the code as we speak today.
Buying out of moral suasion, or buying out of the need to actually have a culture change? Because there have been a number of issues from multilateral institutions. You also talk about some big lending groups saying it's all about discipline, it's all about prudence. Corporate Zimbabwe needs to think and act like business people.
Correct. It's a mindset change. You're absolutely right in saying that it's not just about buying a piece of paper, but it's actually changing our behaviors. And then, this takes time. The realization is there. And I think, as I said before, we are going the right direction. And I think in the new Zimbabwe, you can already see the changes that have taken place at the public sector level, private sector level. We've seen NGOs also changing the way they do business. SMEs are starting to realize that we need to level the playing field. And how do we level the playing field? Standards, good governance, ethical principles.
Well, you are in standards, being the Director General of the Standards Association. Are there standards in business leadership?
Yes, there are. There are standards in business leadership. And I think some of them have already alluded to them already. A lot of it is the way we do business. The everyday things that you do. It's not rocket science. It's the way we do business, how we relate with our customers. Do we, ensure that our customer is happy at the end of the day? It's not just about making super profits, but it's also making sure that the people that I work with are happy, and also making sure that the community around me are also happy. And that way, your business is going to be a sustainable business into the future.
Will conferences and symposiums be the answer to sharing of ideas and creating that new, vibrant business leader? Join us there. Welcome back. This is Economic Forum, and our focus this week is business leadership in Zimbabwe. And with us is business leader, Dr. Christine GADZIKWA. She is the Director General of the Standards Association of Zimbabwe, the current president, and only female president for that matter, of the African Organization on Standardization. And of course, she has come up with a concept known as Dare to Lead. It is very interesting that we've seen a trend of Zimbabweans attending to many conferences, symposia, and workshops, talking over almost the same things, but just in a different forum. Have these been effective in changing the mindset of the business leader?
What I want to say is dialogue is very, very important, especially now under the new dispensation. We need to realize that I think for a long time people were wanting to express themselves, and they didn't have those platforms. And now we do have a number of platforms to discuss. Yes, discussions are important. Yes, these business forums are extremely important, because this is where we find that we distill the important issues that need to be maybe crafted into policies. I think you've seen that Zimbabwe now has come up with a number of policies. For instance, we've just seen the motor industry development policy coming up, and soon we're going to be seeing the Zimbabwe Regulatory Quality Infrastructure Policy coming up. And these policies cannot come about if there's no dialogue. So I think the meeting of minds between the government, the private sector is really important, because this is where we start to share ideas and agree on a common path that we should take.
But don't you think the time that has been invested in workshopping should now be translated into action? Because you talk of policy, Zimbabwe is known for having one of the best policy frameworks, but there seems to be a huge gap between policy formulation and policy implementation.
I agree with you. I mean, let's state a fact that the issue of implementation has been a problem. We talk a lot and we don't implement. But I think under the new dispensation, once more, I think you can see that there's a drive towards making sure that we, do that which we promise. In other words, whatever we set out to do, we should actually implement it. So I think the focus now is on implementation, and less on just making promises. In other words, you can promise less and deliver more.
Let's talk about the forthcoming Business Leadership Conference. In what way is it different from the other business conferences that Zimbabwe has actually hosted?
Okay, this conference is the 5th edition of the Business Leaders Conference that will be held from the 12th to the 14th of September in Victoria Falls. And what's going to make it very, very different is that we're now saying standards can actually create a shared future. Because what we realize is that, government has been setting out a number of different, initiatives. Private sector has also been talking about what they want. But at the end of the day, we need a shared future. We need to be able to say, where is Zimbabwe going? Where do we want to go to in the next 5-10 years? And I know there's a directive to say by 2030, Zimbabwe must become a middle income country. And this shared future is what we're talking about at this conference. And what is it that we want to see? Do we want to see smart cities? What is it that we want to see? Do we want to see a Zimbabwe where investors are coming into this country? And what are those things that we need to put in place? How can we make sure that the language that we're speaking is a shared language, and the language of standards is what we're talking about? But
when we talk about this shared vision, as it were, do business leaders, and in this particular, it looks like the politicians are the ones that are mapping out this particular roadmap, which business and economics should be going. Do the business leaders read this vision with clarity, and are they able to actually translate it into actionable programming?
I think the future that Zimbabwe wants to see, the business leaders want to see a good future. And they are reading into what government is saying, and they are trying to translate it into what activities they need to do. In other words, I'm saying government cannot do it on their own, but the business leaders should also be there to lead and to provide the solutions. Because it's all well and good to articulate the problems, but we must actually provide the solutions of where we want to go and how we propose to get there.
In that context, can you say business leaders have come up with the solutions? Because I know for one thing, if it is anything, if it's a business membership organization, they are talking about the challenges. If it is players in the private sector, they are presenting challenges. Do they have solutions to some of the challenges that are being faced in Zimbabwe today?
Absolutely. They do have solutions. For instance, one of the areas that I know business leaders have been talking a lot about is the issue of competitive edge, competitive advantage. How can Zimbabwe enjoy a competitive advantage in the international community? And they are discussing quite a lot around that area because we don't operate in isolation. We are part of a bigger global village, isn't it? So business leaders are realizing that there are opportunities out there. We're talking about special economic zones. How can local investors compete for the same special economic zones as the foreigners? And this competition is also very healthy. Protectionism will not work. I think we've all realized that. So the business leaders today are modern business leaders who are thinking ahead, they're thinking widely, and they're also thinking about the future. Because they realize that solutions of yesteryear are not going to solve tomorrow's problems. So they are providing the solutions of what they want to see in terms of competition, in terms of market access, and also in terms of just solving the everyday problems. We're talking about waste management. These are key problems. Energy. These are key problems. Corruption. These are key problems. And the business leaders are being consistent and saying, we can do things better. We don't have to do things the way we're doing them now.
Analysts have said that the only way forward for business in Zimbabwe to grow is by having a strategy. Do business leaders have a common strategy to actually set as a benchmark?
Well, Well, when you say a common strategy, well, that can be debatable, but I know that a number of business leaders have strategies. I mean, we're actually entering the planning phase now, where, most companies are now going for the strategic planning sessions, and they're putting together their minds to say, what is it that we want to do in this financial year? So they're going to their strategies, coming up with their plans, but at the end of the day, there's a context around which they are operating, because they operate within a certain environment. You see, they are operating a macro environment, but there's also a micro environment as well. And these have to interact for them to be able to operate.
Given that, where do you see Dare to Lead? Where do you expect it to be in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I'm very excited, Tawanda, because I believe that everyone who is sitting in an office today as a business leader, it doesn't matter whether you're a chief financial officer, a chief operating officer, a chief executive officer, a director general, or a president, for instance. The Dare to Lead concept applies to all of us. And it's basically saying, let's go for what we want. Let's have a shared future. Let's have a positive Zimbabwe. Let's have an open for business Zimbabwe.
Dr. GADZIKWA, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And the take-home message there being Dare to Lead. This has been Economic Forum. My name is Tawanda Gudlanga. Join us again next week. But of course, for your views and comments, make sure that you take, of course, the message, the number, the email address that is on your screen. Until then, it is pleasant viewing.